How is knowledge created, shared, and transferred in an organization? One person who's tried to answer this question is the Japanese organizational theorist Ikujiro Nonaka. One of the most fundamental points to understand about Nonaka's perspective is that he divides knowledge into two forms, tacit and explicit. So let's start there. Explicit knowledge is any knowledge that can be articulated, codified, stored, and accessed. This encompasses almost everything that we commonly think of as knowledge. A recipe in a cookbook is explicit knowledge. Data points entered into an Excel sheet are explicit knowledge. And it's not just about words and numbers either. The pictograms you follow when you assemble your IKEA furniture are also explicit knowledge. This video is explicit knowledge. Then there's tacit knowledge. The word tacit comes from tacitus, the Latin word for silent. This is knowledge which is difficult to transfer by verbalizing or writing down. Very often, tacit knowledge is associated with skills and experience, things that you can do, but you can't really explain exactly how you can do them. Your ability to ride a bike or drive a car involves a lot of tacit knowledge. The way an experienced salesperson can judge that this customer will probably accept a smaller discount than that one. So they maximize their revenue while making sure they close the sale. These are all examples of tacit knowledge. The first thing you might be realizing is that we have an awful lot of tacit knowledge, and you'd be right. But because it's difficult to put into words, it doesn't receive as much attention as it might. There are, of course, large overlaps between the two forms of knowledge. Many activities involve a mixture of both. Take our earlier example of driving a car. There's a lot of explicit knowledge involved. You can explain to someone what the indicator light is, or how to hold the steering wheel for maximum control. You can even explain how to find the biting point on the clutch pedal, but that will only help a learner driver so far. They need to try and practice for themselves, to get the feel for it and to build up experience. Initially, they will find it difficult to find the biting point and will either stall or jump the car. Eventually, they'll be doing it quite well. That's because they have added the tacit knowledge of the skill to the explicit knowledge of your explanation. It's important to remember that explicit knowledge differs from tacit in that it can be articulated, not that it necessarily has been. Let's say that you have a recipe at home, which says that you should use 2 eggs. Having followed this many times and experimented a bit, you find that the recipe actually works better with 3 eggs. Maybe you haven't told anyone this or written it down anywhere. This is just something you know in your own mind. Nevertheless, this would still be considered explicit and not tacit knowledge. The test is whether the knowledge can be codified, or at least whether it can easily be codified. You could write this adjustment to the recipe down if you wanted to, you just haven't done this yet. So tacit knowledge is not the stuff that hasn't been written down or said out loud. It's the stuff that is difficult to put into words, even if you try. Nonaka didn't invent the concept of tacit knowledge. That is usually attributed to Polanyi's 1958 work, Personal Knowledge. But Nonaka has gone further and looked at how forms of tacit and explicit knowledge are created and transferred between people in organizations. He did this through the SECI model. This model depicts the 4 ways that knowledge can be created and passed on. Explicit to explicit. Knowledge can be created and transferred through a process Nonaka called combination. Explicit to tacit. This takes place through internalization. Tacit to tacit transfer occurs through a process of socialization. Tacit to explicit. This is done through externalization. Let's look at a few examples. Starting with combination, explicit to explicit. This is a form of knowledge creation and transfer that is going on all the time. Imagine the skipper and navigator of a fishing vessel charting their course. They might download a weather forecast, tide tables showing the times of high and low tides, data on where fish stocks tend to be at that time of year. They take all these different pieces of information and combine them, plotting a course on their nautical chart. They have created a new piece of knowledge, their intended course, by combining several different pieces of explicit knowledge. Most of us are frequently engaged in this activity of combination during meetings, discussions, or even while working alone. Explicit knowledge is converted into tacit through internalization. An example of this might be following a set of SOPs again and again until you can carry out the steps without really thinking about it. The first time I ever made pancakes, I followed a recipe very closely, but the mixture was a bit lumpy and I didn't heat the pan enough before I started. It wasn't a success. Having made pancakes many times, now I'm able to get the mixture just right, and I never pour the first one until the pan is at the right temperature. I couldn't tell you what the temperature is, but I get it right every time now. I've internalized the knowledge and I can just do it. Most people will recognize these first two forms of knowledge conversion. We often talk of internalization as learning by doing or learning through practice, and much of our study time at school or university involves combination tasks of some kind. But what about converting tacit knowledge? Nonaka states that tacit knowledge can be transferred from one person to another through socialization. Here you don't explicitly go through what needs to be learned. The one person just picks it up from the other by being around them, getting feedback, imitating them, and absorbing their beliefs, attitudes, habits, and behavior. One example that we all should be able to relate to is the way children learn language. No one sits 4 or 5-year-old children down and explains to them what a past participle is, or how to use the subjunctive mood. And yet most children of this age are using their native language quite proficiently, and in many cases following grammar rules that neither they nor their parents could explain if asked. They listen, try, copy, get corrected, try again, and so on. This is socialization in action. Finally, we come to externalization. This is probably the rarest form of knowledge conversion, and the one least well understood. The tacit knowledge is by its very definition knowledge that is difficult to put into words, so we shouldn't be surprised that the process of externalization doesn't have as many obvious examples. Externalization is often facilitated by metaphor. We find it hard to explain exactly what we mean, so we use a metaphor or an image. Well, it's like this, and that helps others, and sometimes even ourselves, to better understand in explicit terms. Another way of externalizing knowledge is to elicit it from others through questions and dialogue. Good searching questions can help someone verbalize what they mean or have known for a long time, but just haven't ever been conscious of. One historical example of externalization might be Archimedes formulating the principle of fluid displacement, supposedly whilst in the bath. The Greeks, and indeed humans all over the world, had been effectively applying the principle for thousands of years by building seaworthy boats, but until that moment, no one had really formulated that knowledge in language. The tacit knowledge of how to build a boat that floated existed, but it was Archimedes who externalized that and put it into words. In Nonaka's model, knowledge is transferred through these phases in a spiral motion, signifying that with each cycle of socialization, externalization, combination, and internalization, the knowledge is built upon. Progress is not merely cyclical. Maybe you should take a few minutes to think about your own domain of expertise. What tacit knowledge have you or your colleagues built up? How can you create opportunities for that to be passed on through socialization? Who can help you externalize your tacit knowledge? Thanks for watching.